the button. All right, opening up. Good evening, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple, like 2 minutes to make sure everybody can log on here and see tonight's presentation. Thank you for being here. Seeing everybody loading in on the side. The chat is turned on if you want to say hello while you're waiting and where you're listening in from. Just wait one more minute. Still see a couple people coming in. And thank you for everyone being here tonight on such a lovely Milwaukee evening. All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? Thank you and good evening, and welcome to the Milwaukee Public Library's presentation with Melinda Myers. We're going to talk about planting your rain garden this evening. Melinda is a nationally known gardening expert, TV radio host, author, and columnist, and has over 30 years of horticulture experience. She's written over 20 gardening books, hosts the nationally syndicated Melinda's Garden Moment program. She's a columnist, contributing editor, lots of things, so many things, which is so great that we're so lucky to have her with us, and appears regularly as a guest on many TV shows. I'm going to throw it over to Melinda. We're so happy to have you here. Just a few before I do. Use that chat tonight to talk amongst yourself. I will ask you to use the question and answer box to send any questions that you might have throughout the presentation. I will ask those to Melinda as time allows at the end. Putting them in the Q&A helps me keep track of who got their question in first, and then I can mark them answered. All right, Melinda, thank you so much for being here. And then if anyone has tech issues, you can just let me know in the chat. Have a great presentation.
Thanks, Beth. And thanks to all of you for joining me. Yes, if you're in the Milwaukee area, the sun came out this afternoon. And even though it's good to see the rain stop, I was hoping for a little dreary evening so any of us in the area might not feel quite so bad about staying inside to watch a webinar. And as always, this one is being recorded and you can access it through the Milwaukee Public Library YouTube channel once it's posted. Beth will send out a thanks for joining us and a link to the handout. There's also a link to the handout in the chat as well. And we are going to get started. I also want to thank Fresh Coast Guardians and Milwaukee Metro Sewage District for sponsoring this webinar. Their goal is to have all of us help them keep water where it falls so we can reduce the pressure on our storm sewers. And thanks to Milwaukee Public Library and Beth for hosting this webinar. They've been great partners with this as well as my library program that's sponsored by We Energies. And the libraries are such a great resource for all of us, and it's nice to team up with them. So I thought I'd start with a bit of a review. If you join me for how to plan your rain garden, this is a review. But in case you missed it, or, I don't know about you, but review and repetition is always good. Rain Gardens, a guide for homeowners and landscapes, was produced by the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. It's a great resource. It's free. There's a link in the handout so that you can download the PDF of this. And it's a step-by-step review of how to, where to put your rain garden, how to plan it, how big it needs to be, and calculating all of those details. The DNR has been kind enough to let me use some of their resources from this as we walk you through. First of all, location is important when you look for your rain garden. You want it at least 6, preferably 10 feet of your foundation, because the last thing we want to do is push more water near our basement. Part of having a rain garden and doing other things to keep water where it falls is to try to keep it out of our basements, as well as to prevent it from overloading the storm sewers. We don't want those rain gardens more than 30 feet away from your home if possible, because the further from your home that rain garden is, the more water it picks up as it travels over the lawn and hardscape, and then you're going to need a bigger rain garden. So consider making it anywhere from 10 to 30 feet away from your house. And I realize I lived in the city of Milwaukee for quite a few years. A lot of us don't have a lot of room to put a rain garden or to keep it 30 feet away. So as far away from your house as you can, at least 6 feet. You're also going to want to work with your local municipality to locate the lateral, just like we did here, because you want to keep your rain garden as far away from the lateral as possible. The last thing you want is more water pressure on that line. And so the city will come out, as you see here, and mark that location. For those of you that may be tuning in out of the city and living more in an area where you depend on a well and or a septic, you need to keep your rain garden at least 5 feet away from your septic. Again, no water pressure on that septic. You want to keep that moisture away, and 8 feet away from your well as well, your wellhead as well. So how do you direct the water to the rain garden? Well, you want the widest part of your rain garden perpendicular to the downspout if possible. It isn't always possible, but if possible, as close to the center, your downspout or your water source, as close to the center of your rain garden as possible. This homeowner did a huge rain garden and they directed 2 downspouts to that rain garden. You don't have to go this big, and you may want to start smaller and then work your way up to maybe 2 separate rain gardens, one for each downspout. Might make maintenance a little bit easier. Um, Call Diggers Hotline if you're in Wisconsin, or 811 anywhere in the country at least 3 business days before you put the first shovel in the ground. I also find it helpful when I'm planning a garden bed because they'll send the underground utility companies out to locate any underground utilities. You want to stay at least 18 inches away to underground utilities whenever possible. You don't want to put your rain garden over top of them because if a repair is needed, they'll dig up your garden. And you want to have them located because if you hit it, you could be injured or killed even, depending on the utility. Inconvenient, you knock out cable, no one in the family is going to be happy. And guess what? If you don't call them in advance and you damage an underground utility, you're responsible for the repair. And they don't need to get any more of your money. Save it for your plants. So once you kind of have an idea of where you're going to put it, review your plan. Hopefully you had one, but if you're like me, sometimes I shop for my plants and then I put my garden together. There are some pre-planned gardens on the Fresh Coast Guardians website. Again, there's a link to this on your handout. If you've already purchased your plants, maybe you took part in the MMSD Rain Garden Plant Sale, and maybe you already bought your plants, so you'll have to adapt one of their plans, or maybe you developed your own. Either case, it's all good. When you're doing your garden, consider how you're going to access not only the edges, but the center of your garden. Remember that really big garden we showed you initially? That person has to make sure they can get into the center of the garden to mulch, to weed, to take care of the plants. And so you want to make sure that you have a way to get to all the plants in your garden. So we installed this rain garden in a south side of Milwaukee home a few years ago, and I thought it was a great example for all of us to kind of take you through that step by step. So here's the homeowner, and she was measuring to get that garden bed as far away from her foundation as possible. Again, at least 6, preferably 10 feet away from the foundation. Then we laid out, I happened to have an old extension cord and I brought along. So we laid that out. A rope will also work, or a garden hose. And I find it helps to lay out the garden with something like that. Lay it out, step back, take a look. Does this look like it's going to work? Adjust as needed. Easier to move that than once you start digging. Then we marked it so it'd be much easier for us to do the edging and dig up that garden bed and get things started. You're going to edge the garden bed for a couple reasons. One is you're going to remove sod and do some digging, but it also slows the infiltration of grass and weeds from outside that future garden bed into the garden. And so for smaller beds, a shovel works great. For larger beds, or maybe you and your neighbors want to team up and rent an edger. The older I get, the better that equipment seems. And let's say there's 3 or 4 of you doing a rain garden. Go and rent the equipment and then pass it from one person to the next. You don't have to store it. It'll make your job easier, and installing those rain gardens will go much faster. But a shovel works and you'll burn off lots of calories. So the garden bed is mulched and it's edged. You can see that we've got that first step done. And then we start to remove the sod. Again, a shovel works great. You're going to want to take a nice shovel, a flat shovel, edging shovel usually works quite well. Make sure it's sharp, because if your shovel isn't sharp, it's going to be that much harder to dig. And you're going to dig down and slice through, removing the roots of the grass. Here again, you may decide to rent a sod cutter. And that's what we did here when we installed the garden bed. Not that it was a huge garden bed, but we could spend hours removing the sod as opposed to having a piece of equipment. And we put it to work. We took care of some sod in some other garden beds and on this homeowner's back bed next to her foundation where she needed to do some work. So this might be another solution. So what are you going to do with that sod? Well, a couple things. Maybe you want to repurpose it. Maybe you have an area in your yard where you've got some bare spots and you decided you don't want to just spread some grass seed, but rather prep the soil and lay that sod so you have an instant start. Plus, it already matches the existing grass. Maybe you want to use that in another place in your landscape. Perhaps you've got an area next to the foundation where the soil is pitched towards the foundation, so you need to elevate it so the water goes away from the foundation, and use that sod to cover that soil, that change in grade. The other thing you can do is compost it green side down in this case. It will eventually decompose and create great organic matter to add to other garden beds. What I did with some when I was creating a new garden bed, I used a sod cutter. I laid it face down, put some Milorganite fertilizer between the layers, stacked it up about 3 layers high, covered it with clear plastic over the winter, secured the edges, cooked it, so I killed that grass and the weeds, and then I planted tomatoes the next year in those beds. Best tomato harvest I had because I created some great soil, fertilized right away when I was creating it, and killed a lot of the weeds by using the clear plastic. Maybe you want to share it with your neighbors. Maybe they have a use for that sod. That's good stuff you don't want to get rid of. However, you don't want to pass along jumping worms. So if jumping worms are an issue, this is an invasive worm that we do have here in Wisconsin and much of the United States. These worms eat excessive amounts of organic matter, quickly spreads like 17 up to 17 acres in a season, and they destroy the structure of your soil. So not sharing these is important. Keep it on your property if you have jumping worms, or solarize before you end up reusing that product. You're going to dig the garden bed to the proper height. Now, depending on your soil type, how much water you're pushing into it, this is where that guide from the DNR helps. Your bed's going to be at least 4 to 8 inches deep, because you're going to want it deep enough to capture the rainwater, and so it will slowly infiltrate through the plant roots into the groundwater. You're going to have to do some additional digging if necessary if your rain garden is on a slope. And this is another helpful guide, because you need to make that level where the water's going to flow in. So you can see what you do here. You're going to dig down deeper to create that ponding area and use that soil to form a berm, so that if you do fill that ponding area with water, any water that overflows the berm will be going at a much slower rate, likely to be absorbed by the lawn, less likely to overflow the storm sewers. You're going to have soil left over probably. This was a rain garden project that I did at a residential housing area, and you can see it was pretty rough soil. So what are you going to do with that? Again, you may want to add it to your compost pile. You may want to use it for building lasagna gardens or other purposes, depending on the quality. Once you've dug that garden bed to 4 to 8 inches, add some compost or other organic matter. That's going to improve drainage in heavy clay soil, because you're going to be capturing rainwater and you want it to drain in less than 48 hours, preferably within 24. For fast draining, sandy, rocky soils, that organic matter is going to help absorb the moisture so it doesn't dry out as quickly. Because the last thing you want to do once established is to have to water your rain garden regularly. As I mentioned before, you're going to need a berm at the far end of your rain garden. So the water comes in from one side, it's going to flow out the other, but you want to try to trap that water or as much of it as possible. So you create that berm so the water, it creates that area, that ponding area to slow or prevent water from going out of your rain garden. You're going to need to direct that water from your gutter, your downspout, into the rain garden. So maybe you're using a downspout extension like they did here. So we removed the sod, filled it with some stone, or maybe you use wood chips and extend it that way. And you can see here. Now, the downside of this option is we've created kind of a mowing nightmare for her. So she's going to mow up to that downspout extension on one side and to the other. So one option is to extend the garden, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The other option is to bury an extension, a flexible drain hose, and that's what we did at this project. So you can see the downspout was knocked loose off the building if you look on the corner of the building. So when I got there, I could tell that whoever cut the grass just got tired of dealing with the downspout going into the yard and just kind of knocked it off its base. So we decided we better bury that, otherwise it would be a problem. So we created a trench, and trust me, it was a lot of hard work, pickaxe, shovel, and everything like that. Luckily had some help doing it. We saved the sod, set it to the side, and then we buried a flexible drain pipe with and buried that, covered it back with the soil and then the sod. At the end of your downspout extension, or at the end of the drain pipe, we put some stones. That way, when we have a heavy rain and the rain's coming out fast, we want to slow down that velocity, slow that water speed so that it doesn't wash out and erode the soil and the surrounding plants. You may also want to put an animal guard, and we, especially because this was a buried drain pipe, we wanted to make sure that nothing got in and blocked it. That would create a problem. All those rocks came from where we dug the garden, so you could tell it was a pretty tough dig, and it took a lot of helpful hands to do it. And this is kind of a clue. You might want to look for friends or family members willing to give you a hand. And again, if you rent equipment, you can reduce the effort at certain parts of the process to save it for those you can't. Or maybe you all team up and do each other's rain gardens, because if you all work together, it does make it go faster and a little bit easier. Now, one of the things I mentioned before is to make it easier is, instead of leaving that grass edge around there, consider extending that garden bed she has at the foundation right up to her rain garden. So she can plant some more traditional garden plants in the garden next to, adjacent to her rain garden. That way she doesn't have to mow on that side. We also want to keep your rain garden at least 2 feet away from the walk whenever possible, because if we get too close, you'll undermine your walkways, and that can cause some problems. As I mentioned, by extending that rain garden with traditional plantings, you're going to reduce maintenance, and it'll just make it a seamless addition to your landscape. Don't have a design, you're not alone. Trust me. When we worked with this homeowner on the south side of town, she had ordered plants before we started working together. And so what I did is I went through the plants and helped her organize so she could plan her garden as we go. And again, I'm a gardener and I call myself a plant placer. And so this is one way I often design gardens. So what I did is I arranged the plants by height so that you weren't putting taller plants in front of shorter plants, right? You want to be able to see them either from your house or the walk so that you can enjoy every single plant. You also want to consider bloom time, because bloom time is important as well, because you want to make sure you have some flowers throughout the season. The next thing is arrange by moisture requirements. So when you look at your rain garden, the plants on the upper edges, it's going to dry out quickly, right? So you're going to want to use those plants that are more tolerant of dry conditions. Things like butterfly weed. This is a type of milkweed. It doesn't spread as aggressively as common milkweed. It tolerates dry soil. Great host for monarch caterpillars. Blooms midsummer into late summer. Beautiful orange blossoms. Hummingbirds, butterflies, and bees love to nectar upon. But it likes it dry, so keep it on the dry drier parts of your rain garden. But put those moisture lovers like Joe Pye weed and the sedges towards the center. So your tags will tell you lots of good information. It'll tell you where they need to go, what sunlight conditions, how much moisture. And the Fresh Coast Guardians website has great information about the plants that they sold at their plant sale. You can also find that information on the recording as well as the handout from the How to Plan Your Rain Garden and Selecting Rain Garden Plants. Both are located on the Milwaukee Public Library YouTube channel, or go to my website, melindamyers.com, and you'll find links to those from my website to theirs. Okay, so we've got the garden dug, we've amended the soil, and we have all these plants. Start setting those plants out. And this is a great chance to kind of step back and evaluate. Look at the tags, check it. Is this working for you? Look for the spacing requirements on the tag. It's easier to move those plants when they're in the pot than once you put them in the ground. And then throughout this process, you're going to continue to adjust. I do this all the time when I'm planting a garden. I have a plan in mind, but once I get those plants at home and I start laying them out, sometimes I discover it's not quite working the way I thought. When you're getting ready to plant them, you want to loosely squeeze the pot, slide the plant out, and then loosen any girdling or tightly bound roots. That's going to encourage those roots to explore the surrounding soil. I've found people that didn't do this, that planted their plants, the roots were pot bound and circling, and halfway through the summer, the plants weren't getting any bigger. I dug them up and found the roots were just continuing to grow in a circle. So as hard as it may be, especially if you're a new gardener, is to loosen those roots, then you're going to want to make sure you plant that plant at the same depth it was growing in the container. You don't want to bury the crown of the plant. That can lead to root rot. So plant it at the same depth. And then work from the center of the garden out. And this is especially important if there are multiple people working in the garden. I have worked on garden beds with people, and all of a sudden they find themselves stuck in the middle of the garden. They have to tiptoe out. And the other benefit is you're kind of putting those bigger plants to the center, the moisture lovers to the center, and it allows you to more easily adjust your design as you go. And then water your new plantings. Water thoroughly so you're moistening the roots and that soil surrounding those roots. You're going to be watering your new plantings maybe initially every few days, and then gradually reduce frequency so you do a good soaking twice a week if you're in fast draining soil, once a week if you're in heavy soil, but adapt that based on rainfall. If you get rain, you don't have to water. Or if it's really hot, you're going to water more often, less often when it's cooler. So weather, soil type, and how the plants are doing, very important. And water the soil, keeping those roots slightly moist until they become established. And it can take 2 years for those plants to fully be established. Leave the tag and snap a picture. I know you may not like looking at that tag, but at least initially, what I sometimes do, and I plant a lot of unusual things, I'll leave the tags in, I'll take pictures of what they look like when they're young. So when they come up in the spring, it's a lot easier to identify. But then I'll also take a picture of the whole garden bed. And that kind of helps me know where different plants are growing. It doesn't matter how long you grow, there's so many new plants or new to you plants that sometimes in the spring it's hard to tell, is it a weed or is it something you want to keep? And trust me, you're not alone. I talk to lots of gardeners who bring me little baggies and go, is it a weed or is it a flower? So, don't be embarrassed. It happens to all of us. So anything you can do to help make it easier is going to help you enjoy your garden more. And then mulch. I'm a huge fan of mulch. It helps suppress weeds. It helps conserve moisture, especially important with those small plants the first couple years. And so a thin layer of mulch, I like something that knits together, especially because we're pushing water into that garden. And as that organic mulch breaks down, it's going to continue to improve the soil. When you're selecting your mulch, you want to ask your mulch provider how they manage the mulch. Is it free of contaminants, weed seeds, jumping worms? You want to make sure you're not spending money and bringing problems in. If you're buying bagged mulch, make sure it's got the certification, Mulch and Soil Council certification on the bag. And that's one way to help you be sure that you're getting a quality product. And then for the berm, you're either going to mulch it and or plant it because you need to keep that soil nice and firm and intact, right? So if that rain garden fills up and pushes against the berm, you need to protect the soil. Remove weeds, and if you start from the time you plant, it'll be much easier. Now, I have a few weeds, too many, in my garden right now, so I know the importance of removing them. And if you can keep after it when your garden is young, you'll get to those weeds before they flower, like you see, and before they set seed, leaving you with thousands of offspring to pull out of the garden next year. And sometimes I find with my new gardens, it's easier to keep up than the ones that I've kind of ignored for a while. So make this a priority, getting out there, checking on your plants, see if they need water, check and remove those weeds when they're young. They'll pull much easier, and especially when the soil is moist a day or two after a recent rainfall. And then be patient. If you're starting with small transplants like those that MMSD sells, great price. It works well to start small, but it's going to take several years for them to reach full size and really put on a good floral display. Now, I know as gardeners, we don't like to wait. And so if you start with bigger plants, you're going to spend more money for the plants, but you'll have quicker results. And so this is a garden bed on my property. This is my son-in-law, Roy, who helped me plant. I kind of went a little crazy, as you can see. And so I bought a lot of 1 and 2 gallon size plants and then a few that were in a quart size pot because I was looking for certain plants and I wanted to get a quick fill. So this was October of 2019. This is what it looked like the summer of 2021. So those plants just had one full growing season. And then here's just a close up. The picture of the plant in front is a rattlesnake master grape pollinator plant. The purple spiky things are Augustaceae or Agastache. You see some cone flowers and alliums. And here's what it looked like in the fall. There were some smaller plants, some open areas, but the display was incredible. Now, I know gardeners often opt for instant color because I see rain gardens all over with annuals. So if you're going to plant annuals, a couple things to keep in mind. They're going to need more attention than your perennial rain garden plants. And these plants typically are less adaptable to flooding and drought conditions. The plants recommended for gardens are those that take temporary flooding and dry periods so that you're not watering your rain garden during dry periods once it's established and plants aren't dying when it's holding the water because we have a lot of rain. So match the plants, the annuals that you choose to the area of the garden. So remember we talked about the edges and the slopes being drier. This is where you're going to put drought tolerant plants. So celosia, that takes full sun, well drained to dry soil, and there's a wide variety available. I think the wheat types or the plume types that you see here will blend nicely with your perennials as well. So it kind of keeps that more informal, natural look of your garden. Amaranth, there are many to choose from. They do reseed readily. So you may want to be careful when you're adding amaranths, but they do tolerate dry conditions. They prefer full sun, will take part sun as well. And again, prefer those drier parts of your rain garden. Cosmos, a beautiful plant with fine foliage. I like the bipinnatus with the finer foliage, more heat and drought tolerant. You can get cultivars that are only like 16 inches tall and some that'll grow 4, 5, 6 feet tall. It will reseed and it comes in white and lavender. And there's even a yellow one that's a little harder to find. But again, I tried to pick plants that not only tolerate the drier conditions that you'll experience on the edges and dry slopes in your rain garden, but those that I think will blend in well with that whole overall design. Zinnias, I love the single zinnias, Profusion, Sahara. They look like perennial daisy flowers, right? And you can find them in all kinds of heights. And the single ones are much more good. They're much better at attracting pollinators as well. So all these plants I mentioned are good for pollinators as well as the drier areas of your rain garden. And gazania is often called treasure flowers, another heat and drought tolerant plant, low growing. So it would be one for the edges, maybe even the berm of your rain garden. So what about those wet areas? Look for plants that tolerate it wet. Now, cleome is an interesting plant because it'll take it wet, but it also takes it dry. And these are big plants. Senorita rosalita is a dwarf cultivar that grows about 3 feet tall, but the straight species can be between 3 and 5 feet tall, and it gets big, a good 2 to 3 feet in diameter. So it's going to fill a lot of space, bloom all season, attract hummingbirds, and it does reseed readily. So get to know the leaves of this plant. You may want to leave them that second year as your rain garden fills in, or you may want to transplant the seedlings to another garden bed. Foxglove is a biennial, full to part sun, moist, well-drained soils. Now remember, you've amended that garden soil. So, you might not want to put it the very center, the deepest part of your rain garden, but it will tolerate it moist. Now, as a biennial or short-lived perennial, the first year you'll have leaves unless you buy a transplant where the garden centers forced it to flower that first year. Biennials on the second year will flower, drop seed, and then die. And so again, most garden centers selling foxglove usually have forced them so they'll bloom that first year for you. So you'll get flowers that first year. Um, and you may get seeds that survive in your rain garden depending on how much water your rain gardens had to hold. But a nice spiky plant that would blend nicely with your others. Monkey flower might be a little hard to find. I don't see it as often as I would like, but it will take those moister areas. And there's even a native mimulus that it makes a great rain garden plant as well. An old-fashioned favorite, balsam, and it's an annual. It's related to impatiens, as you can see by the botanical name. Grows tall, part shade, will tolerate shade, tall plant, and it forms flowers all along the stem. It can reseed, usually easy to weed out if need be, but this is another one that would be great for moist areas. And impatiens. Now we picked one of the hybrids that looks more like jewelweed, so it might blend in a little better than, say, your New Guinea or your impatiens walleriana. But I've seen those impatiens we typically use in garden beds planted in the water, the edge of a water garden, so the roots are totally covered in moisture. So impatiens, believe it or not, will take it wet. They like moist, well drained, but they'll take that standing water on occasion. So it might be one to consider. And then jewelweed, which is another impatiens, one of our native. It's an annual. You've probably seen this growing along waterways, the edges of lakes, often used to treat stinging nettle. People will crush the leaves and wipe it when you've got stinging nettle to avoid the rash. Also called also, the seed pods, when they form, they'll break open and shoot the seeds. So you may find some seedlings in your rain garden, and it may not be a bad thing to have those on an annual basis with your perennials. So you've got your garden planted, you've watered it in, you've got it started. You want to check the water throughout the growing season. And I recommend a rain gauge because, you're probably like me. I've watched storms come in right towards my house. The clouds seem to part and water everybody's landscape but mine. And so rainstorms in the summer can be very spotty. So a rain gauge will tell you how much water fell on your garden. And sometimes, we have rain all day and it seems like we must have 3 inches and we only got a half an inch because it was a very light drizzle. And other times, like the other night, we got 2 inches in a short hour because it was a torrential downpour. So this will help you judge whether you need to water and if so, how much. And then continue weeding throughout the season. Again, keeping up with the weeding makes it easier in the long run. And you know what? And I know it's easy to let the weeds get out of control. Trust me, I know. And so the more you can do to keep them under control, the better for you in the long run. So what do? You've enjoyed your garden and it's fall. An important thing to do is leave the healthy plants stand for winter. It increases hardiness, which is important for new plantings. You want to make sure your garden is well watered before the ground freezes if it's been dry. And by leaving those plants stand, you're going to enjoy all this beauty from your garden throughout the winter. So winter interest, many of these provide seeds or food for the birds and home for beneficial insects. And so that's a great way to not only enjoy your rain garden year round, but also to support the songbirds and beneficial insects. And when you're dealing with snow, don't pile snow into your rain garden because your rain garden is going to have enough to manage. The ground's frozen, so you don't want to overload it. So let the rain garden manage the snow that falls there as it melts. Definitely do not use de-icing salt in your rain garden or pile snow treated with de-icing salt into your rain garden. That's hard on the plants. De-icing salt is hard on our cement, hard on our waterway. So shovel first and then only apply plant-friendly de-icing salts if needed. And that's going to be better for your landscape and better for your rain garden as well. So if you plant for success, okay, planting, proper planting, proper placement, you're going to minimize maintenance and you're going to increase the success of your garden. And I think those are all important things because if it's easy, we're going to do it. And most importantly, enjoy your rain garden. I want to thank you for protecting our lakes and waterways no matter where you live. Anything we can do to keep water where it falls is a great way that we can improve water quality, reduce the risk of flooding, keep water out, help keep water out of our basement. And so you're not only helping your community, but you're helping ourselves and yourself by keeping water where it falls. I always like to ask you to help me grow gardeners. Somebody inspired you, inspire the next generation. You know how good you feel when you pull weeds, you plant gardens, you watch them grow. Research has found it's just as important for kids. Kids gardening or exposed to nature are more focused. They perform better in school. They exhibit less ADHD symptoms and it elevates their mood. And you know what? It's fun to watch kids when they're growing and watching things grow. Or maybe it's a young family down the street, or maybe it's somebody installing a garden, being a rain garden for the first time. Share your expertise and your wisdom with others. And if you're new to gardening, thank you. We're so happy to have you. It's a great community and we're happy to have you part of it. Thanks again to Fresh Coast Guardians and Milwaukee Metro Sewage District. I'm proud to be a partner with these two. Milwaukee Metro Sewage District, I know often the press gets the bad part, but across the country, they're known for all their efforts to improve water quality and enlist our help in managing water where it falls. Also, thanks to Fresh Coast Guardians, they're trying to enlist people like you to make a difference in Lake Michigan's quality and waterways across the state. So thank you for your part in that. I want to invite you to be part of our other library program. We Energies has sponsored this year's library program. We teamed up with Wisconsin Public Libraries and the public libraries of the UP of Michigan to offer webinars, videos, and activities. There's a link on my website to Beauty Outside Your Door, and you'll find links to the recordings so you can watch the April, May webinars, a link to register for the June webinar, which is underappreciated pollinators, and there's videos and activities to help you with your garden along the way. On May 11th, 12th, and 18th, I'll be at Ebert's Greenhouse Village in Ixonia, west of Oconomowoc. So if you're in the area, stop by. They have some great plants. I've been shopping already and buying things for the State Fair Garden, but I'll be on hand to answer questions as you wait in line to check out. And then on June 1st, I'm talking selecting, planting, pruning, and care for hydrangeas. And as I mentioned before, June 5th, underappreciated pollinators, that webinar that you're free to join from anywhere. Please stay connected. There's links to my website and all my social media on that handout link that Beth put in the chat. Again, I want to thank Milwaukee Public Library for hosting, Beth for being here this evening. They're all so busy these days, so thank you. They're great partners. And now I'm happy to answer any of your questions you might have.
All right, let me bring up the questions here. I'm just seeing one, so if anybody has any additional questions, make sure to drop them in the Q&A. Before I ask you that question, just letting everyone know I dropped the handout into the chat, so you should see it there in both a PDF that you can download or the link that you can click on. If you haven't seen it, I'll also email the handout to you along with the recording link probably tomorrow. That's what I'm hoping anyways.
Okay,
And
I know
then
it's otherwise check in on it with us on Monday.
exactly. It sometimes depends on how long it takes them to put the video up on YouTube because I send that to them and then it's out of my hands. Very good. So, okay, here's some questions. The first one is from Janet. Any concerns about foxglove's toxicity?
Good question. So, one of the things to always watch for is many plants are toxic to pets and people. One of my favorite resources is the University of North Carolina Gardener's Toolbox. Gardener's Plant Toolbox, because that website has great information on toxicity for animals and people related to plants. And so, you may be surprised to find a variety of plants in your landscape. There's some toxicity concerns. So, foxglove is digitalis, and as Janet's thinking about digitalis, the heart medicine. So, if you don't need it, it's not a good thing. So, good point. I really appreciate it. If you're worried about your pets, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty of Animals, ASPCA, .org is their website, and that has great information on plant toxicity for pets. Not every single plant, but quite a few. And I recommend you use the botanical name. And I think they're included on your, I meant to on your handout. So but whenever you're using it, because when I go to the ASPCA site, I find common names vary across the country. And so sometimes common names I'm used to using here in the North and the Midwest are different from what they're using on their website. So the botanical name that they always include will help make sure you get to the right plant. So thank you for sharing that. Great point.
And I dropped the link to that university in the chat,
Okay.
and then as always, we'll include the links that were talked about in the email, so you don't have to take any notes if you don't want to. All right, Melinda, Christine would like to know if my yard slopes down, how high should the berm be?
So good point. And let me see if I can, and sorry, you're going to see my messy desktop here, but I'm going to go back a little bit to close your eyes. You don't want to look through me going, but I want to get to that. Okay, here we go. To this picture. So when you're looking at it, so what they did here is they took a stake at the high end and they took a stake at the low end, and then you use a string to level. So you can use a bubble level or hold your level, and then you want that level. So as you can see in the bottom picture, your berm is going to be level with the start point of your rain garden. So hopefully that clarifies it. So it depends on how deep, how big the slope is going to influence how deep you want to dig. So that's why they're recommending, avoiding steep slopes, because that means you're going to have to dig deeper. Doesn't mean you can't, it just means you're going to be doing more digging. So a couple of stakes and a string and a level, and that's a great way to make sure that that berm is the same height as where your garden starts, and then the center needs to be dug deep to collect the water. That guide that I mentioned from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resource, and there's a link in the handout, talks about the depth based on the slope. But I think this is probably the easiest because you can put it down and see it. So then what happens is that berm is going to slow the water, and then it'll go back to whatever that height of your yard is beyond the rain garden. So hopefully this helps clarify that a bit.
Excellent. Kristen would like to know, do you have a water runoff area? Do you have plans for that? I have two active sump pumps and I'm planning a wildlife type of pond with plants. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So you're looking for something rather than a rain garden. It sounds like so a couple things. There are people that I have seen rain gardens. So I'm not sure. So if I'm not answering it, we'll try this again. So I have seen people run their sump pump into their rain garden. And a lot of times it depends. I'm out of the city of Milwaukee and I have sandy soil. I have a sump pump that has not run in the 4 years I've lived here. And so, that's something to consider is how often is it running? If you have a similar situation, you may want to run your sump pump in a downspout to your rain garden. If your sump pump runs often, you may want to have it run just your sump pump. If you only have occasional use, the other option is a dry riverbed. And that's what I did off of one of my gutters in front of my house, because we had a gutter off the garage that went to this small bit of land, a very narrow bed between my front walk and the garage. And when we had rain, it would always overflow, even though I had good drainage, and we'd get ice build up on the sidewalk or we'd get water on the walk. And so my grandson and I dug a trench, lined it with landscape fabric, filled it with stone. What I didn't do, and we had to correct, is used impermeable, like a pond liner, a section of that next to the foundation, because often what you'll find, we used a rain chain to direct the water from the gutters down to my dry riverbed, and often it splashes. And so a friend of mine who does landscaping suggested I do this non-permeable kind of liner right under that area. So if I did have splashing water, it wasn't building up next to my foundation, then the water can run through, drain, and if I had excess water, it's okay. It's like a river, and then it drains and it's dry. And then you could put plants again that take flooding and drought. If the other option is to look for rain garden plants, and if you're not concerned about puddling water, I'm not sure that's what you're looking for, but you want to make sure your soil will drain well, will hold moisture when it's dry, and then using rain garden type plants is another option. So rain gardens are really designed to manage a lot of water at one time, so it's not running off into the storm sewer. But it's not designed to handle areas that flood. So I'm not, I'm hoping that helps you. And then here's the other thing. If you're looking for something more specific, can't think of any materials off the top of my head that might meet your needs, but info@melindamyers.com. And I apologize if any of you are still waiting for me to answer your question. Maybe submit it again to remind me, but that might be, maybe I can help you if this doesn't.
Excellent. And then, right, I did that one. Is it okay to pull up plants if I decide to change the location of my rain garden to a different area?
Oh, you bet. I don't know any gardener that hasn't moved plants around. I have met people that move it as often as they move their furniture. That's a little hard on the plants and you. And so, yes, the longer the plants have been in the garden, the more established, but they're perennials as long as they're not trees and shrubs. And shrubs, some people will put shrubs in larger rain garden beds or garden beds, but perennials move very easily. And so that's a great thing. The one thing I didn't talk about with ongoing care is digging and dividing. So once your rain garden plants fill in, some are a little more aggressive than others, you may need to dig them out divide them into smaller pieces, then you'll have more plants to start another rain garden or put somewhere else in your landscape. Or if you don't have jumping worms, to share with someone else starting a rain garden. And then you can plant them back in the existing garden as well, but they'll be smaller size. And that's one way to deal with aggressive plants, or just as they get older, perennials grow and spread and get bigger. So yes, I realize a lot of times we put a garden bed in and we're like, oh, this was not the best place. So yes, lifting those plants, if you have to, throw them in a pot, keep them until your new garden bed is ready, or if possible, get the new spot ready, then move the plants right from your old rain garden to your new one, or just divisions if that's what you're doing. The less time they're out of the ground, the easier on the plant. But these are all pretty tough plants that we use in rain gardens, so they're pretty tolerant. So you should have great success.
And okay, that sounds good. And then Marilyn would like to know, should we include grasses in our rain garden design? If so, what would be the best species to use?
Oh, I'm a big, huge fan of grasses and sedges. Sedges are grass-like plants and they tolerate moist conditions. And so we have a lot of native sedges as well as ornamental sedges, and those typically, not all, will tolerate those moist soils. I've got some great detailed information in my handout that there's a link on my website as well as the Milwaukee Public Library YouTube channel on how to select rain garden plants, and talks about the various different sedges. In terms of grasses, most grasses like good drainage. And so things like prairie dropseed is a short grass, would be great on your berm. It has a growth habit similar to the ornamental fountain grass. What's cool is it blooms late in the season, has good fall color. The seeds are great. It's a host plant, gives you year-round interest, and so it's very good for that as well. Um, Little blue stem is a nice one. Again, it will take moist soil, but likes better drainage, not the wet part. So I would put it closer to the, on the dry slopes of your rain garden. A little blue stem works very well for that. Fox sedge tends to be a little aggressive, so you'll want to be careful with that when you're looking at it. But grasses help provide unity throughout your garden. They help provide support, because things like New England aster sometimes could use a little stiffer neighbor or somebody to help keep them more upright, so you don't need to trim them early in the season to promote more compact growth. And so any of your sedges, those would be good. Most of those are great. Palm sedge is excellent. The leaves kind of glisten. It's called palm sedge because the leaves come out perpendicular to the stem, and it can be a little aggressive. We have it in our rain garden at We Energies Energy Park. And so we dug and divided it after about 5 years, and everybody took home a trunk load of plants, and we still had plenty left in the garden. And in fact, I use it, some of those next to my pole barn, where the water runs off into this planting bed, a raised bed that's about 3 feet wide, gravel on top of weed barrier and soil. And it's done, well, naturally, it's just on top of soil because the gravel's kind of disappeared, came with the house. And I've put it in there and it survives. So it only gets watered from the rainfall. And I used a lot of rain garden plants in this area that are doing quite well. Some of the rudbeckias, monarda or bee balm, the palm sedge, some grasses, switchgrass. There are some dwarf cultivars of switchgrass. The straight species will take over. So look for one the right height. Switchgrass will take moist but needs good drainage. So again, think about putting it in an area where the height can be tolerated, but also there's good drainage, where that area tends to dry out a bit more quickly. So hopefully that will help. But again, if you go to my website, look on the home page on the right-hand side under webinars, view webinars on demand, click on that. You'll find the various webinars and links to the handout, or go to the Milwaukee Public Library YouTube channel. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Beth, that I think there's a section either for me or for sustainable and green.
Yes, we have a
Okay.
channel for that, and I will put that into the email follow up with everything. Because yeah, we have a really good library of videos that you can watch at your convenience.
Thank you, Beth.
Mhm. All right. Next question. Sonia lives in Cudahy, Wisconsin. There's underground streams under our foundation, so a lot of drainage from a sump pump with a soggy area on my front yard make a great rain garden.
As long as it's soggy but not a pond, you're probably going to have to dig deeper because you're managing a lot more water. And so, and the other thing I'd recommend is you may want to have your sump pump separate from any downspouts, because if your sump pump's running all the time, you're going to have to manage a lot of water. So when you go to, and I know I keep referencing it, but the reason I like that DNR handout or that pamphlet is it takes you step by step, because I think it can be overwhelming when you're starting and you're like, oh, I got to do math to figure out how big my garden needs to be. But they have charts to make it easier. And what you don't want, I'm just concerned if you have areas where you have ponding. Soggy is one thing, ponding is another. And so I think if you can manage water separately than the rainwater, so you don't want to run everything into that soggy area. I'm not sure, you'll need a pretty big rain garden to manage it. So you have to decide if that's going to be an area large enough to do that. A lot of municipalities are connected, and I don't know for sure in your area in Cudahy, some older communities, their downspouts are connected to the combined sewer system. So I know in Milwaukee, that's the case in a lot of the urban areas in Milwaukee, where the downspout pushes water into the combined sewer. And so they're really working hard to get people to disconnect from that. But one, you need to make sure it's okay, check with your municipality. And two, you need to make sure there's a place to push that water so it's not going into the neighbor's foundation, because you don't want to create problems for your neighbor. You also don't want to push the water into the sidewalk where it'll freeze in the winter and then you have ice problems. I did a video. I'm not sure if it's up yet on Milorganite's website, but you might check for downspout disconnect on MMSD or Milorganite's website. I think they've posted it. And then otherwise, check with your local municipality. I know the MMSD has a link to information on disconnecting the downspout from the combined sewer system, no matter where you live. Rain barrels may be an option too for those of you looking to manage stormwater differently. So rain gardens is one option, rain barrels as another. We recently did a webinar with the library system for MMSD and Fresh Coast Guardians on managing water that falls on your landscape. So that will be in that collection of videos and handouts that Beth sends. And that may give you some other ideas of how to manage that water so that I think you're going to have to do a variety of things given that situation that you're in, given all the challenges and the pressure on managing water and keeping it where it falls. So take a look at that, or at least the handout, and then kind of look at how you can direct the sump pump water and how you can deal with the water from your downspout as well.
Okay. Marilyn asked, is it okay to add large rocks as a landscape feature in the rain garden?
As long as there's plenty of surface area for the water to um, filter through the plant roots in the soil below, yes, it is. You just want to make sure you haven't covered the soil surface, because the more soil surface, the better the drainage. And then you want to make sure your plants have plenty of room to root as well. So yes, large rock boulders. I always say you plant boulders, you don't drop them from the sky. They always look a little better, maybe even incorporating it on the sides where you want to run some of those drier plants. Again, making sure you have enough area for the water to drain. That's the only concern, because they're going to take up some volume as well as surface area.
Pardon me. John plans to install a rain barrel in his soon-to-be landscape backyard. It will eliminate the need to dig a trench. Where can I find a source of rain barrels in Milwaukee?
So the Milwaukee Metro Sewage District does offer rain barrels to people in their service areas. I think they're still doing it, so check with them. Um, you can order them online. I found prettier ones available. I know some garden centers also offer them. For a while, I know Steins did. I don't know if they still do. I haven't checked lately. You might want to, I would get on the phone and call before I drive. But I know some of the garden centers have teamed up. So whatever part, Bluemel's on the south side, Miners on the north side, Bayside, I'm not sure. I would just get on the phone, call start close to you. I think I've even seen them at Home Depot and Lowe's as well, some of the big box stores. Now, Lakefront Brewery, I'm not sure they still do it, but for a while they had all of the food grade containers that can easily be converted into rain barrels. And I bought a bunch of them. They're like $5 or $10, really good quality, and they sold all the plumbing equipment. I don't know if they still do it, but it's worth a visit to them or a call to see if they're still doing that. They were looking for ways to recycle or repurpose those big barrels. They're 50-gallon drums, and they're really heavy duty, so long lasting. And then those could be painted. That's what we did for State Fair. We painted them. Dawn, who works with me, does great artwork, so she painted them, and we installed the plumbing. And so it was a great way to manage them, and then set it on something so that it drains with the help of gravity when you're filling your sprinkling can or whatever. So I would call garden centers, check the big box stores near you, and then also if you want to get a little creative, maybe talk to Lakefront Brewery. They're located in Milwaukee. So those might be some places to check. But I'd get on the phone first or check their websites just to see what they have.
Excellent. Sean asked, I have been getting dirt and mulch from the Brookfield Recycle Center. How do you feel about the safety of getting such things from municipal waste centers? Safety as in the worms or pathogens, etc.
Great question. So when I worked for the city, we have that stuff. We have to find a way to manage it. And if it's totally decomposed, some research out of the University of Minnesota found that once it's totally decomposed, the herbicides are not an issue, totally decomposed. Jumping worms can be managed if you can treat the soil or mulch at 104 or 105 degrees, a little discrepancy there, for at least 3 days. It's a great resource. So here I was reading the University of Maryland, because what do? We got mulch. We want to mulch our gardens. We want to buy compost because we usually can't make enough. Here's what they suggested. I thought it was a great idea. Take heavy duty plastic, lay it on the ground, put a 6-inch layer of the mulch or compost, then fold the ends of the plastic over so you're creating just a pouch. And then this needs to be in a sunny spot. And I know that's easier if you have room or a driveway versus if you have to drive down the alley and park in your garage. That was my old house. So you might have to do it. I'd have to do it on my patio when I lived in the city. But you check the soil temperature, and a soil probe thermometer is always a good tool to have. Check when it reaches 105 degrees. It needs to do that for 3 days, and that will kill a lot of your weed seeds, some of your pathogens, but especially any cocoon and eggs of jumping worms. And that's probably the biggest contaminant we're worried about. Some municipalities like Greendale, I don't know if they're still doing it, but I was lucky enough to go to their compost site, and they use those big plastic tubes like you see farmers put round bales of hay in to store for the winter to keep them dry. And they put all the raw material in, they inject air and fertilizer, and what comes out is amazing. So that material was really great. Wood chip mulch, there's debate. You may want to work with a tree care company. So then, if they're harvesting, if they're out pruning trees in your neighborhood and you have a place to store it, they'll drop a load off. Now, it's not as nice as some of the, material that you would buy, But if you're okay with a rough type mulch, that might be a possibility. Or if you buy it bagged, set it out in the sun and let it cook. Ask your municipality how they're managing for those things. And that's a good place to start. It's usually the Department of Public Works in your municipality, and they should be able to give you some insights. And hopefully, uh, if there were problems, I would think they would be doing something to manage. And some municipalities work really hard at managing, so they're creating a good product. And especially because so many are trying to get rid of this debris, they want to make sure it's a good quality that they send out for you to use. So I would contact them to see how they manage it. They should have some insight to share with you.
Okay. Michelle's or their neighborhood has small lots. Each lot
Yeah.
is up a little higher than the neighbors. My yard is above the next yard. Our rainwater severely goes to their yard. We will dig 8 inches for sure. Should we put a rock border around the garden also?
I think if you, as long as it won't hurt to put a rock border, just make sure it's easy to maintain because you're going to want to be able to cut the grass surrounding it. And thank you for being a good neighbor because sometimes I talk to the person at the bottom of the hill and nobody cares because the water goes to their yard. So digging it good and deep should help really greatly slow that process, maybe encouraging them to do the same. So, if both of you are managing the water, and maybe the neighbor on the uphill side of you, that would be a good strategy. This might be the time that you rent the edger, rent the sod cutter, and you all get busy digging and doing it. So, thanks for being a good neighbor. Digging 8 inches. Maybe you want to berm the side. It doesn't have to necessarily be stone, but maybe you want to berm the side going to their house as well as the side furthest from the source of water, which it sounds like you'll get water coming from your neighbors as well as your downspout. So that far side next to the neighbor down below and towards the street, maybe put a berm that way. And that's probably a better solution. And you could plant that as well. Use some of those more drought tolerant plants that will also help slow the water and protect the berm and keep it in place.
Let's see. Terry says, "Thank you, Melinda. You're a gem. You're generously sharing your wisdom. Thank you to you and the library. Thanks to you, Terry, for being
Yeah,
here
thank you.
tonight." Yeah. All right. That's always great. Angela asks, "Are there any vegetable plants you would recommend in or near a rain garden?"
I wouldn't put vegetable plants in the rain garden because most of them like moist, well drained. And I one time heard somebody recommend tomatoes, and I was like, no, because blossom end rot on tomatoes, especially in soils that have plenty of calcium, which we do in Wisconsin. The problem with blossom end rot is a moisture imbalance. So we get wet, then dry, then wet, then dry. The plants can't absorb the water or the needed calcium, and that's why we get the black spot on the bottom of the tomatoes. So maybe put your vegetables in that traditional garden next to your rain garden instead of in the rain garden. Where I talked about extending your garden bed so it comes up adjacent to your rain garden to reduce maintenance, that'd be the perfect place to put your vegetables. Greens like lettuce and spinach are the most shade tolerant. They all like full sun, but they're the most shade tolerant. Root crops like beets and radishes take at least 4 to 6 hours of sun. Things you eat, the fruit or the flowers like broccoli and cabbage or broccoli and squash and tomatoes and peppers and eggplants need the most sun, preferably 8 hours or more. So that might help you. So you could have your vegetable garden between the house and your rain garden, and then your rain garden could have those rain garden plants. And think about how the sunlight hits that area, right? So if your sun's going from east to west across your rain garden and you get plenty of light by your house, you could grow any vegetables. If it's moving so that it's on the east or west side of the house, so you only get half a day of sunlight, see how the plants in your rain garden are going to cast shadow on the plants next to your home, your vegetables, to help you choose wisely.
Awesome. We're at our last comment, and oh, there is one more in the chat. So Doreen just says Menards had some rain barrels last fall and breweries still do sell. So if people are looking
Thank
for
you.
them, I I have to say, I think my husband was looking for a rainbow from MMSD and they were not selling them at this time.
Thank
So,
you.
yep, so they are doing the compost bin. So if you would like a compost bin, they are selling those.
Thank you, Beth. I always, you know what?
Yeah.
I always appreciate, and Doreen, thank you. Gardeners always are great at sharing information. So thank you for
Mhm.
sharing that, both of you.
Very good. And then the last question is from Anne, and she's just asking, how do you identify jumping worms?
So there's a good, there's a couple resources I would tell you. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources has a good brochure on jumping worms and on their invasive, on their Wisconsin DNR. I never can get to their, but if you go to their website, Wisconsin DNR invasives, you can get there. The other thing is UW-Madison there's a great webinar and it's a YouTube video now on jumping worms. His name is Brett. Sorry, I can't remember, but on UW Landscape Arboretum, do UW Landscape Arboretum jumping worms, and that should get you to the YouTube video. And he walks through the whole life cycle. So when you look at jumping worms, they usually in cold climates overwinter as eggs or cocoons. I'm kind of concerned. I think I have very sandy soil, and I think that's really slowing the spread, but I've got a few garden beds and I'm trying to keep them contained. And I think I've seen some earlier. They usually don't come out until June when the soils are warm, but we've had such a crazy winter and spring. There's this source around them. And let me see, I'm going to go back to this jumping worm because this will be easier for me to describe. Oh, sorry. Okay, don't share the jumping worms. There's your sod. Okay, sorry. Research purpose. Here, don't share it. Here we go. So when you look at this, see that little kind of that white thing collar around the near the tip of the jumping worm. With earthworms, it only goes part of the way. With jumping worms, it goes all the way around the worm. So that's one thing. These grow huge in one season. They're also called snake worms. Um, Somebody said they should call them thrashing worms because they thrash when you hold them. They'll drop their tail to try to escape. So that's another way to tell. You can use a solution of mustard in water, dry mustard, mix it with water, and that gets all the worms, earthworms and jumping worms to the surface so you can help see if you've got the problem. And some people will do this so they can gather up the jumping worms, throw them in a clear plastic bag and cook them in the sun. I carry a container of rubbing alcohol with me when I go out in the garden or a plastic baggie so that if I do find any, I throw them in there. It's not going to give 100% control, but at least I feel like I'm reducing the spread. And every one I take out of my garden means I'm not having their offspring in the future infect my garden. There is a product called Botanigard that is about 98% effective, not 100%, and it's pretty pricey. Um, there are areas in the country that have been dealing with them for a long time. I know UW-Madison Arboretum is trying to work with gardeners to find out what plants are doing well, where jumping worms are an issue and where it's a problem. So I think that's another source that you can find. So if you do a Google Wisconsin DNR jumping worms, they have a nice brochure on it, or UW Madison Landscape Arboretum. That'll probably get you to their video. And I will, Beth, email you. I will look for links to that. So Beth, and I'll send those to Beth so she could include it with the follow-up. I'll do that as soon as we hang up. I'll do a little search
Awesome.
and find those and email them to Beth so you'll have them. It's something to be aware of. I have to tell you, when I found the first one, I was devastated, but my garden is doing fine. I have sandy soil, so I have to be drought tolerant anyway. And I'm just managing what I can. I'm trying to keep them out of the woods that adjoins my property or the back of my property. That's my main concern more than my garden. So just something to keep in mind. I did a blog for Milorganite too, and I'll put a link to that because that covered a lot of information with a lot of other links that you'll find helpful. So I'll send that all to you, Beth, tonight.
Awesome. Um, yeah, I think that's all our questions on for tonight, Melinda, and just a lot of really nice thank yous in the chat if you have some time to read through those.
Oh, thanks.
I just want to again thank you for being here and sharing all this wonderful information, and then just remind everyone that we will see you soon for the Underappreciated Pollinators webinar, which is on June 4th, and I will put the registration link in our follow-up email. Again, hoping to do that tomorrow, Friday, if not by Monday. So
And thank
thank
you,
you.
Beth, for hosting and everyone for joining us tonight and for making a difference and keeping water where it falls on your property. Thank you.
Yes. Have a great evening, everyone. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.